Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today, we're going to be diving deep into Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. It's a novella that's both fascinating and kind of disturbing, and honestly, it's packed with layers of meaning that we're going to try to unpack today.
Yeah, Metamorphosis is a story about a lot of things: isolation, alienation, identity, and really the absurdity of life. And Kafka really takes us on a journey through the mind of Gregor Samsa, this man who wakes up one morning transformed into a giant insect.
You hear people talk about metamorphosis and how weird it is, but I think what's so powerful about it is how Kafka uses this bizarre situation to explore these really real human experiences. So the book itself really focuses on Gregor's transformation, his family's reaction to that transformation, and ultimately his tragic fate.
It all starts with that famous opening line, right? One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. I mean, it's just such a powerful line that throws you right into this unsettling world and really sets the stage for this psychological drama that unfolds throughout the entire book.
Yeah, it's such a striking image, and the way Kafka describes Gregor's initial reaction is fascinating to me. Like, instead of freaking out about being a bug, he's worried about missing his train and disappointing his boss. What do you make of that?
It's brilliant. I think Kafka's highlighting Gregor's existing alienation. He's already trapped in this job that he clearly hates, and he feels like just a cog in this machine. So his transformation is kind of like an externalization of his internal state.
So you're saying it's not just about the physical change, but also about like an emotional and psychological transformation that he's already going through.
Exactly. And the way Kafka describes the family's reaction is equally insightful. They're horrified, of course, but there's also this growing sense of resentment, like Gregor has become a burden to them instead of a loved one.
Yeah, I was really struck by the scene where Gregor's father throws an apple at him.
Yeah.
It felt like this really violent rejection, not just of his new form, but of like who he is as a person.
It's a powerful scene for sure. And the apple itself is such a potent symbol. It could represent knowledge or temptation, even original sin. But in this context, it becomes a weapon,
Mhm.
like a symbol of the father's aggression and the family's inability to really cope with Gregor's transformation.
Yeah, and as Gregor becomes more and more isolated, you see his physical condition deteriorate. Like there's this clear parallel between his decaying body and his fading hope.
Kafka masterfully uses that physical transformation to kind of mirror Gregor's emotional and psychological decline. As he loses his ability to communicate, his connection to the human world weakens and he just starts to fade away.
His room, which was once his private space, becomes a prison. It's like a symbol of his isolation and the family's desire to keep him hidden away.
You're totally right. The room itself kind of undergoes a metamorphosis reflecting the changing dynamics within the family.
Yeah, and then there's Gregor's sister. Initially, she's the one who tries to care for him, but even her compassion, like, eventually wears thin.
Greet's character arc is heartbreaking. She represents this glimmer of hope in the story, but ultimately she also succumbs to the pressure of societal expectations and the weight of caring for someone who has become so different, so other.
I found it really unsettling how quickly the family adapts to Gregor's absence after his death. Like they're eager to just erase this really difficult chapter from their lives and move on.
Yeah, that speaks to a broader theme that Kafka explores, this societal amnesia. We tend to forget about those who don't fit in, those who make us uncomfortable. And it's just easier to pretend like they never existed than to really confront the complexities of their situation.
And isn't that what makes Metamorphosis so relevant even today? It forces us to ask these tough questions about how we treat those who are different, those who are struggling, those who may not fit into our definition of normal.
It certainly does. Kafka's work is full of these uncomfortable truths, and that's what we'll continue to explore as we dive deeper into this text.
I'm interested.
Picking up where we left off, I think it's interesting to consider how Gregor's transformation impacts the family dynamics. He was the breadwinner, and all of a sudden they're forced to confront their own financial vulnerability.
That's a great point. It's not just a personal crisis for him. His metamorphosis throws the entire family into turmoil. They have to find ways to cope not only with like his new form, but also with the loss of his income and their changing roles within the family.
Exactly. And you see this play out in their interactions with the lodgers. They kind of represent this intrusion of the outside world into their very private struggle.
Right. The lodgers, with their obsession with order and cleanliness, they seem to embody these like rigid societal expectations. They're totally intolerant of anything that disrupts their sense of normalcy.
Yeah. And their presence forces the family to further isolate Gregor. They're hiding him away like he's a shameful secret. They're trying to maintain this facade of respectability even as their world is falling apart.
It's like they're more concerned with appearances than actually dealing with the situation. Which in a way is another form of metamorphosis, isn't it? Like they're transforming into something they weren't before. They're becoming more guarded, more suspicious, more focused on what other people think.
That's a really insightful observation. Kafka seems to be suggesting that sometimes the biggest transformations happen not in our bodies, but in our hearts and minds. That pressure of societal expectations can really warp our perceptions and behaviors. It can even lead us to make choices that we wouldn't normally make.
And it's not just the family that undergoes this kind of transformation. Think about the charwoman. She's initially totally unfazed by Gregor's appearance. She even calls him a dung beetle.
Right. The charwoman comes from a lower social class. She's used to dealing with like the harsher realities of life. So she accepts Gregor's transformation more readily than his own family does. It's almost as if her worldview, which is shaped by her own experiences, allows her to see beyond the surface. She recognizes the human being beneath the monster.
It challenges our assumptions, doesn't it? You'd think the family would be more understanding, more compassionate, but Kafka flips that on its head. It's like he's suggesting that sometimes the people closest to us are the least equipped to handle our struggles, especially when those struggles challenge their comfort zones.
And this ties into a larger point, I think, about the limits of empathy. Even those who care about us can reach a breaking point. They might love us, but they might not always be able to understand us or accept us, especially when we become different. When we challenge their idea of who we're supposed to be.
Makes you wonder if Gregor had transformed to something less repulsive, something more socially acceptable. Would the family have reacted differently? Would they have been able to find a way to connect with him, to care for him, without feeling disgust or shame?
That's a really interesting question, and it's one that Kafka doesn't answer directly. He leaves us to think about the complexities of human relationships, the ways that our perceptions of normalcy and difference shape how we interact with each other, and really the limits of our capacity for empathy.
And it's also interesting to think about the role of music in this story. There's that scene where Greet plays the violin for the lodgers, and they're initially captivated by it, but then they quickly lose interest.
So that scene is so symbolic. The violin could represent beauty or art, a way to kind of transcend the everyday realities of life.
Yeah.
But the lodgers who embody these bourgeois values of practicality and order can only appreciate it for a short time.
Yeah, it's as if they can only tolerate beauty when it's convenient, when it fits into their neatly defined world.
Mm.
And once it becomes disruptive, once it reminds them of the complexities and uncertainties of life, they just turn away.
And that indifference to Greet's music, I think, mirrors the way society often treats people who are different people, who don't conform to the norm. We might acknowledge them, we might even be fascinated by them for a minute, but in the end, we're so quick to dismiss them, to label them as other and move on.
That's a really powerful insight, and it connects to that theme of isolation that runs through the whole story. Gregor's physically isolated in his room, but there's also this deeper emotional isolation that he experiences even before he transforms. He's stuck in this job he hates, he struggles to connect with his family, and his transformation just amplifies those feelings of alienation.
Exactly. And that sense of isolation is something that I think so many people can relate to. Even if they haven't literally turned into giant insects, we all have those moments where we feel like outsiders, misunderstood, disconnected from the world around us. And Kafka captures that feeling so well in Metamorphosis.
It's almost like Gregor's transformation is a metaphor for the human condition. Like we're all constantly changing, evolving, becoming something new. And that can be both exciting and terrifying, especially when it means we're not who we thought we were or who other people expect us to be.
That's a profound way to put it. And it's exactly that tension between transformation and expectation, between our desire to belong and our fear of being different, that makes Metamorphosis such a compelling and enduring work.
Absolutely. There's just so much to unpack in this story, even in these seemingly small details. For example, the way that Gregor's room is gradually filled with unwanted furniture and junk, as if he's being erased not only from the family's emotional landscape, but also from their physical space.
You're right. Every detail in Kafka's writing is deliberate, layered with meaning. It's a story that really rewards close reading and invites multiple interpretations.
I think that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not a story that gives you easy answers. It's a story that challenges you to think critically, to question your assumptions, and to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to continue to do as we move into the final part of our deep dive.
Mhm.
We'll explore the ending the family's reaction to Gregor's death and the lingering questions that Kafka leaves us to think about.
I'm ready to delve into that. So we've talked about a lot. Gregor's transformation and his family's reaction to it and all the societal pressures that shape their choices. But for me, it's the ending of the story that really stays with you.
Oh, absolutely. Gregor's death is so quiet, almost anticlimactic, And the family discovers his body, and instead of grieving, there's this really obvious sense of relief.
It's almost like they've been set free from this horrible burden. They immediately start making plans for the future, talking about finding a husband for Greta. It's just such a stark contrast to the despair and isolation that Gregor experiences in his final days.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the ending so disturbing. It forces us to confront this idea that sometimes even the people closest to us can just move on and forget about our struggles as if they never even happened.
Makes you wonder if they really ever loved him.
Yeah.
Or was their love always conditional based on, his ability to provide for them?
It's hard to say. Kafka doesn't give us any easy answers. He paints this really complex picture of a family under a lot of stress. Their love for Gregor might have been real, but it was definitely overshadowed by fear and disgust and exhaustion.
And this goes back to that theme of societal amnesia,
Hmm.
right? Like, we as a society, we tend to forget about people who are different people who make us feel uncomfortable. It's so much easier to just erase them from our memory than to face their suffering.
Exactly. And that's what makes Metamorphosis so relevant, I think, even today. It's a story that challenges us to examine our own prejudices and how much empathy we really have and the ways that we might be contributing to pushing people to the margins of society.
That last scene with the family taking a tram ride into the country is really powerful. You see Great stretching like this huge weight has been lifted from her shoulders. It's a moment that you could see as hopeful, like
Yeah.
a new beginning for them, a chance to heal and move forward.
I can see that. But there's also something darker there, don't you think? Like their lack of any remorse for Gregor, their eagerness to just embrace the future without even acknowledging the pain of the past. It just leaves you with this feeling of unease.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if this is really liberation or is it just denial? Like a way to suppress the guilt and responsibility they might feel for what happened to him.
And that's what's so brilliant about Kafka. He doesn't spell anything out for us. He leaves us with these open questions that make us really grapple with just how complicated the human experience can be.
So what does this all mean for us, the readers? What are we supposed to get out of this story?
Well, to me, Metamorphosis is a story about how fragile human connection really is. It's about how our ideas about what's normal and what's different can shape our relationships, the choices that we make, even our own sense of who we are.
It's also a story that pushes us to look beyond what we see on the surface, to see the humanity in everyone, even those who might seem strange or different to us,
Yeah.
and to think about the effects of our actions, both as individuals and as a society.
And maybe most importantly, it reminds us that the most meaningful transformations don't happen to our bodies, but to our hearts and minds.
Well said. This has been such a powerful reminder that literature can make us think and question what we believe and have important conversations.
It's a story that will stay with you long after you finish reading it and makes you reflect on your own life, your relationships, your place in the world.
We hope this episode has encouraged you to read Metamorphosis and grapple with these timeless questions that it asks. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep those conversations going.